right? It's me, Ashley Keller Williams. Continue on the book, Backdoor Revolution. All right, man, I want to start at the end because he said this thing that's really, interesting. So this chapter is called Impacts on a City, all right? And here's what he said that I think this is like what's so inspiring about the ADU. He basically said that, let's see, usually we already know this, that we have amateur homeowner developers, all right? So you're not having like a conventional house developer, right? So usually they're gonna hire like, a contractor, and then the contractor, what they're gonna do is they're gonna like subcontract out work, right? So he's basically saying, like, accounting for all the trades that come in to help develop these ADUs. ADUs tend to be like kind of like a grassroots housing development movement, okay? Because it's going to inherently help out small businesses and all that stuff, right? Because the contractor's going to go and get like people that are local to the area and bring them in to help with the house, right? So I thought that was fantastic. So that's at the end, but let's go back to the beginning. So basically, the main objective of this chapter for him is to really remove some of like the myths about ADUs. And I mean, I think that if I had to kind of like put voice to some of the concerns, I think that people are worried about, bringing more people that are renting into their communities, and and then what comes along with that, right? So, extra cars, like cities have certain resources, right? So, all the additional things that come along with having more people in some of these residential areas. So the reason that ADUs are looked at as like a possible way of helping with the housing crisis we have is because in areas that are like, here in Everett, for example, like R1 and R2, a lot of those areas are pretty well filled in and developed. Like there's not like a lot of like vacant land in there. And so it becomes a challenge to put like a large housing development there. Like you're not gonna be able to like just go into like a R1 and like take like half a block or something and put like a huge apartment building. All right. So, like you got to keep in mind that that's like one of the like benefits, right? Like you're able to add additional housing units on smaller parcels of land, and basically then now you have more housing. All right. There's this page that he mentions this. There's some crazy stats in here. Okay, so remember this book is a little bit older, but I think that some of this is already kind of like coming to pass. All right, he said 1 to 2 person households represent 62% of the country's households. Okay, I mean, maybe that's not that much of a surprise, right? Because I think about like the baby boomer generation and all that stuff. A lot of those folks, their adult children have moved out. And, if they're alive and they're still together, right, there is probably just 2 people, maybe 1 sometimes, right? Because, maybe they got a divorce or whatever, right? So he basically is making a case for like really a need for these smaller housing units. Like he doesn't really, according to where the demographic is going, like what the housing need is, right? It seems like we need more houses that would accommodate a 1 to 2 person household, not households that would accommodate like 6 people, right? Now, I mean, I guess I could see an argument for maybe 3 to 4 person households, right? Because, what if you have a couple and then they have their in-laws move in or whatever, right? Or something like that, or you might then have a bit of a larger number of people living in a house. So, I mean, he has these like bullet points, and they go by one. Like all of them are so good. Okay, but I'm just gonna kind of give you the ones that kind of spoke to me, and I was kind of like, oh wow, It says here, and it would be great to kind of like verify this because this book was written in 2018. He says of new households forming between 2010 and 2030. 87% will not have children. Okay, 87% will not have children. And then he says, of the new households formed by 2030, 50 50% will be coming from the 65 plus cohort. Yeah. And I can see that, right? Because, you know, it's like the baby boomer generation, right? Like that's kind of like the tail end of the baby boomers, right? And you're going to start going into like the older Gen X folks, right? Their kids, you know, a lot of their kids are now grown. You know, their kids are grown, they've moved out. You know, the house that they have that's like a 2,000 square foot house just doesn't really work for them anymore, right? And so you can see how it kind of like really limits their options, right? Like, so they've got a lot of household square footage they don't need anymore. They're heating it, they're paying for it and all this stuff. So then it's kind of like, okay, what do I do? Maybe, you know, like the house that I'm in right now, maybe you take one level and you make it into an ADU. You live on one part, have someone else live on another level, right? So, you know, providing those houses, the living spaces for a 1 to 2 person household. He goes on to share some data on like the housing size percentages and like, you know, he looks at them like over like 100-year period, like how the number of people in a home are decreasing and, well, especially like 5 or more person households and how you can see the 1 and 2 person households increasing. I think another thing that he brought up that was really interesting related to this has to do with having walkable areas, right? So, you know, a lot of people really want, you know, to be in areas where they are close to all the things that they use, right? Like they don't want to necessarily have to drive, you know, they would prefer to be able to just go out their front door, get to the place they're trying to get to. And so that'll kind of come up as I kind of go through this chapter, because one of the things that you know he hits on has to do with parking. Okay, so just kind of like put a pin on that parking. All right, so he talks about ADUs as affordable housing, and basically he talks about like the definition of being cost burdened and stuff like that. Like you know, he kind of makes this argument that ADUs are less expensive, you know, and maybe would keep rents down and stuff like that. In our market, I don't know if I see it going that way, right? Like here's what I could see. If we focused on building a lot of like studio, 1 bed, 2 bed, little houses, right? They could become so prevalent and their rents are so low that they now can like actually like influence the average rent, right? Like I could see that. But I think in our area in Everett, I mean, I think that, you know, I think rents are going to become more expensive because housing is expensive, right? So these ADUs here don't exist yet, right? So someone has to build them, and they have to build it so that it's profitable, right? Like no one's going to like build an ADU to like lose money. So, you know, I guess in a way it is. I mean, I think here's how, you know, when he talks about it being affordable, it was a little bit funny. He was kind of talking about, oh, well, a lot of people, they don't actually like rent out their ADUs as like long-term rentals to people. They let like a family member live in there, okay? And then they let the family member live in there for free or whatever. I mean, okay, like if we're gonna add in all the family members or whatever that are family members and friends that are like renting for $0, I mean, you could see how that could influence like the average rent, right? You know, so I almost, you know, like if I were going to evaluate that data set, like I might remove those people, because I think, because I guess then how is that different than just like keeping your bigger house and then having your adult children just live with you? I mean, like probably that would actually be much cheaper than moving out of your bigger house to, let's say, a smaller house and then adding another small house to your lot. I don't know, dude, like just think about the time and energy and frustration spent on that. Like just time on the phone making phone calls, okay? I don't know, okay? So, and while that may be true that it's going to these people and they're not paying much, or if anything, I don't really see it like generally in my opinion as being necessarily affordable. You know, he talks a little bit about how ADUs might impact neighborhood character, and we kind of touched on that a little bit when we were talking about zoning, right? Like, if you have, we have like a historic area up here in Everett. So if you have like a, kind of like a early 1900s looking house, and then you put like this huge modern ADU in the backyard, it might like affect character. But I would say generally speaking, what ends up happening is as you're walking on the street, you might not necessarily notice an ADU, right? You might not necessarily notice an ADU because it's kind of like it's tucked back in the backyard maybe, right? So, it's gonna like just kind of really depend, okay? But I would say generally, in my opinion, the ADUs that I've seen, it's really kind of hard to see them, and it doesn't seem like they really impact the character of the neighborhood per se. And especially since, at one time our city had a restriction on that, right? So that you would have to have it approved through the neighbors. So it just really depends on your locale, right? Whether or not it's gonna impact that. The next thing they talk about is parking impacts. And again, I think he makes the point that maybe parking is not affected that much by ADUs. And he talks about how it really like depends on where you're putting your ADU, okay? If your ADU is already in like a parking challenged area, right? Like, there are some neighborhoods where, maybe you're near some stores, or you're in an area, maybe you're closer to downtown where people are trying to get to shops, right? And that kind of like downtown parking is already kind of like spilling into the residential area, or like you're near a school or something, right? Then, maybe there's some parking challenges, right? But I think typically what his argument is that typically parking is not a huge issue unless it's already a parking challenged area. And I think that I could agree with that. I could get on board with that without doing a lot of numbers. I do know that in our area, I'm not sure if they require it now, but they did have some parking requirements, and they were able to loosen those parking requirements as long as, the place that you're building is close to transit. And I think that makes sense. If it's near transit, great. More than likely maybe the person will take the bus, or, if it's near a bike lane, maybe they'll ride a bike. Who knows? So he then goes on to talk about informal ADUs, right? I mean, like, here's the thing that's so funny about ADUs. Like, it's like they've just given a name to these like little apartments, okay? But they've been around for a while. The informal ones that he references in the book here are ones that have been done without permits or done illegally, okay? So they're out there. And so I would say that if you're looking for a property with an ADU, I would encourage you to go do some research and see if it's actually permitted, all right? I mean, you want to know that, right? Because it's probably contributing to the value of your home, right? So you want to know, like, are you going to have to fix something? Is someone going to call code on you or whatever once you rent it out, right? People don't want any problems. So I would just make sure you do the research and find out, like, is this ADU legal? And that pretty much takes us all the way to the end, where he talks about, like, the development of like a cottage industry economics of ADUs. I mean, I could easily see that in my own mind, like I'm thinking of a local contractor, and they have several partners that are local that are helping them develop these ADUs, and they're not like huge construction companies. I could definitely see that. And I could also see how it might be easier for them to, assist an amateur homeowner developer, and give them more time than they would get with some of the bigger development firms, and also do it for a better price, right? Some of the bigger development firms, because they're development firms, they may have like minimum charges and all that stuff that really don't make sense for, just like a single small, basically like a little tiny house. So that is impacts on the city. I mean, we're getting basically to the end of this book. So there's a chapter here that talks about the different case studies. And, I'll go through those. He talks about a pathway for planners. So we're moving through it, and advocates of ADUs. I mean, like, to me, I kind of like get into this part here where, I don't know, right? Like, I think it's kind of almost like a historical perspective, right? Because ADUs are legal here. They want ADUs here, right? Like everybody, at least in our area, is like, hey, we're all pro ADU. Like, you know, the city's on your side. So it'll be good. It'll be good. So that is the video. Please like, subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you on the next one.